Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into today's Author Talk series brought to you by the Library Speakers Consortium. The Library Speakers Consortium is a partnership of more than 350 library systems across the US, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, with the goal of making Author Talks more accessible to communities of all sizes. I am Brandon Adler, your host and moderator in conversation with each of the acclaimed authors that you will hear from throughout our series. Today, we are so excited to welcome best-selling author Victoria Aveyard to talk to us about world building and her Realm Breaker series in general. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I was like dancing around to the countdown. It was quite catchy.
Yeah, it's like that. It's upbeat elevator music.
Right. Yes. Yes. That's a really good way to put it. Yeah. And if you see the doors behind me bang open, it's not a killer. I have a dog that knows how to open the doors behind me. So if you see that, it's just an animal. It's not anyone in my house.
It would be even scarier if the dog knew how to open the door, but also like slowly creep it open.
No, she bangs in. She is all systems go.
Okay, so I know that everyone is super excited to get started. Before we begin, let me give that standard housekeeping information. Keeps everything running smoothly. Then we will dive right in. So as always, we have compiled some questions that were pre-submitted with registration, but you all can ask your questions live as well. So you click that questions button that's just below the live stream video to submit your question at any time. Keep in mind, there are a lot of you tuning in, so we won't get to everybody's question, but we will do our best to get through as many as we can. Now, to formally introduce our guest for today, Victoria Aveyard was born and raised in East Longmeadow, Massachusetts, a small town known only for the worst traffic rotary in the continental United States. Yep. She moved to Los Angeles to earn a BFA in screenwriting at the University of Southern California. She currently splits her time between the East and West Coasts. As an author and screenwriter, she uses her career as an excuse to read too many books and watch too many movies. She is the author of the New York Times bestselling Red Queen series, as well as the Realm Breaker series, and you can visit her online at victoriaaveyard.com. So I use my career as an excuse to read too many books too.
Yes. I mean, if we can say it's for our jobs, why wouldn't we?
Yeah, of course. Best excuse ever. So I do have to say that in preparation for this chat today, I came across a very funny video of you on Epic Reads.
Oh God, from what year?
From 8 years ago. And it was your epic author facts.
I don't think like my self-esteem could handle going back and watching that.
I loved it. The first part that I laughed out loud about was the Pokemon cards situation.
Oh no. That's always, when you're in an icebreaker situation and they say like, tell us an interesting fact about you. And mine is always, I broke both my arms stealing Pokemon cards, but I did not know I was stealing.
You were like, in my worry and embarrassment to get away, you flipped over the handlebars.
Yeah, the scooter flipped over the handlebars, broke both my arms, lay in the gutter for a second because my friend abandoned me. And then at the time, elementary school nemesis's mother drove by and picked me up.
That's so good for you.
Formative. And I think, we talk about as writers, we're not sitting in our little holes creating new worlds and writing completely fantastical things because we're well adjusted. And that was probably one of the moments that really contributed to who I am as a person.
Well, one of those facts that you gave also was related to writing, is related to selling Red Queen.
Okay, I don't remember these facts. So,
oh, well, maybe I do need to send you the videos.
Yeah, please don't.
Yeah, so you tell the story about how you heard that you'd sold Red Queen.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. So at the time, this was 2013, April 2013. And I had written Red Queen following graduation from college. I had moved home to put all my eggs in one very weird, very volatile basket and write a book. And I wrote the majority of the manuscript from July 2012 to January 2013. ended up signing with an agent. And by April, we were out on submission. And at that time, obviously I had no job. My college loans were about to kick in. And my mom, who was a school teacher, her school didn't have buses. And so a lot of parents would like pay people to pick up their kids and bring them home. And so that's what I was doing at the time. I was driving children home from middle school. And for the 2 weeks I was on submission, I would be constantly checking my email and my agent would send me my rejections or let me know, we're advancing here. Oh, it got rejected here. And when I got the call from her that I had sold, or that we had an offer, I had just dropped those kids off. And I was on my way home and she told me, we have an offer. It's from HarperCollins. It's a preempt. It's for this amount of money. We have 2 hours to accept. And I was like, is this good? Is this, because I trust you? I don't know. And my agent said, it's good. We should take it. And I said, okay, I'm going to tell you where I am on the street. Like, this is the cross streets I'm at. 'Cause if you hear a bang, I have crashed the car. But I got home safely to an empty house and I waited for my parents to get home from work and I showed them the deal memo and my mom started crying and my dad thought it was a lie. He first thought I was pranking him and then he thought I was being scammed. And up until the moment he came with me to New York to sit in my agent's office and sign the contract and he went through it page by page, no legal background whatsoever, but he needed to see it. And then he was like, okay, this is happening. So yeah, that's definitely one of my epic author facts is that nobody believed me when I sold my first book.
That's a great story though. I feel like okay, I guess the follow-up question to that then that I like to ask is, when did you first learn that you hit the New York Times bestseller list? Because that's also kind of a like, where were you when this happened question?
You're really taking me back. So with the first Red Queen book, I was actually on tour when I found out. I remember it was a Tuesday in Naperville, outside Chicago. Mm-hmm. And I was in the hotel room and we had a couple hours before our event that night and I was on tour with 2 other authors. And I got the call in the hotel room. And of course, now in hindsight, I know when I have a book coming out like that Wednesday at this certain time, that's when the calls go out for the bestseller list. And at the time I didn't really know. I knew we were like waiting for it, but I didn't really understand. And it wasn't as prevalent in my brain as it would be now. I got the call and I said, hello. And it was like a bunch of people on the phone. And I didn't realize it was like all of my publishing imprint and my agent and my editor. And they were all screaming, you're #1. And I was like, okay.
Thank you.
Because again, I didn't understand what a big deal that was. And now in hindsight, I'm like, oh my God, it's, a tearful experience. And then I was just like, great, that's amazing. And I texted to the other 2 authors, like, I'm going down to the hotel bar to have a glass of champagne. Would anyone like to join me? And then that night we had an event and it was lovely because we all got to celebrate together and I got to be with readers and we were all like, yay. Yeah. So that was on tour in a hotel room by myself.
That's great. That's good though. That's a good story.
Yeah. Thanks.
So let's go back even further.
Oh my God.
So Erin is asking if you can talk a little bit about your journey as a writer. So you went to film school for screenwriting. So was you kind of knew that writing was always something you wanted to do? Yeah.
So I had been writing, as kids do, like with my crayons from when I was really, really young. And I'd always been really into fantasy, high fantasy. I remember the first thing that really got me writing when I was a kid. My brother had an N64 and he played Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time a lot. And it's a 1-player game. And the way I could like contribute and be a part of it is I would be with him with the guidebook and be reading the map to him and looking at the maps. And I became really enamored with just fantasy maps. And I started making my own. And then, of course, the natural inclination from there is, well, what's happening in this world? Like, who are the people who live here? What are the stories about them? And so that's where I jumped off from when I was 6 or 7 years old. And then I read Ella Enchanted as the first fantasy novel that really stood out to me and made me, love storytelling in that way, but also ask questions and be like, why does this happen? Why is their currency called this? I want to see more maps. I want to understand more things about the world. And then, of course, like any kid who's into fantasy, Lord of the Rings for me was completely formative. Not just the books, but also the movies started coming out when I was 11 years old. And I remember that being like a complete shift in my brain. And it wasn't just, I like telling stories, I like reading books. It was, I need to tell stories and I need to write them. I don't know how you do that professionally. I don't know what that path looks like. I don't know if that's even possible for me, but it was something I really felt impulsively that I needed to be doing. And I got into writing fan fiction actually when I was in middle school and high school at the library, at my town's public library, because my parents weren't off from work after school. And so I would walk from my middle school or my high school to the public library and I would write my fan fiction on the computers.
What fan fiction did you write?
You're really asking me to expose myself. To be fair, all of the fan fiction is gone. It does not exist. I took it all down and it really hurt me to do that, but I had to for my own sanity. And just, I don't want people judging things I wrote when I was a teenager. Sure, yeah. But I definitely wrote for Lord of the Rings. And I definitely wrote for like Pirates of the Caribbean. Okay. I mean, I've seen all of these influences. Star Wars. Yeah. But storytelling was always so central to me. And then in high school, I'd also always really loved television and movies, but I never really understood, you know, how do people do that also? And I remember I was watching the American Film Institute's, they did a televised like award ceremony of an appreciation of George Lucas, like a Lifetime Achievement Award. And there was a whole section talking about in his career how he went to film school. And he specifically went to the University of Southern California, who at the time had pretty much one of the only film schools in existence, and now is very much one of the best in the world, and is very, as like in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, has kind of a pipeline, and is where you go if you want to learn how to tell stories visually. And I kind of fixated on it, but was also like, oh, that's gonna be kind of impossible. I don't think I'm good enough to get into a place like that. But I also was very intimidated by the idea of writing prose, you know, writing full novels is a very intimidating prospect. And somehow in my silly little brain, I thought, well, scripts are shorter, so that's less intimidating. I don't understand how to become a professional author, but maybe there is a path to becoming a screenwriter, which I also really connect with and resonate with. So I applied to film schools and regular colleges, and I only got into my film schools. And somehow, even though both my parents sat me down and kind of were like, we think you're really smart and really talented, but please know you most likely did not get into USC or NYU. And we need you to like be aware that that probably won't happen. Not to mention they're very expensive. And then of course I ended up getting into both. And that was a shocking experience. And I ended up going to USC and studying screenwriting there. And it was actually a very smooth transition, at least in terms of like writing and structure, of going from what I was learning in screenwriting classes to writing novels. Because at least for me, I really, really adhere to film structure, even in my novels. I very much love 3-act, 8-sequence structure. A lot of people will talk about it as like save the cat. That's just the way that I learned to tell a story. And at least for Western audiences, it is the most familiar way that you are able to metabolize the story. So I'm really reliant on the things that I learned in screenwriting, and they translate really, really well to writing prose. It's just the format that's different. So people look at a script and look at a book and think, oh, they look so different, but the bones aren't actually different. And pretty much everything I learned about plot, character, pacing especially, I use in writing novels. And I think that's why I gravitate towards YA as well, because YA, a lot of people talk about what is something that makes a book YA. Is it because of the age of the character? For me, I think more than anything, it's the pacing of the story. And YA pacing is extremely fast and it's propulsive, and you feel like you're being pulled through the novel. And that's screenwriting. That's what you are taught when you are learning how to write scripts, is you need to have grabbed your audience and pulled them through, and your scenes need to be fast. So it translates really well for me. So you just needed to get a degree in screenwriting to not be intimidated to write a novel. You just have to go to a really good film school. But In actuality, every author I've met has a completely different path to publication. So many of them have studied, you know, English, literature, math. Plenty of people didn't go to college. It's really, you know, you can learn on the job. You can learn from reading other books. That is the through line, is everybody reads. You don't necessarily need this certain degree, but you do need to read to become a writer.
You do. And you're right. Everybody does kind of have this different path and different process. I think it's why we get so many questions from viewers about process, because the answer with every author is different.
Yes, yes. And there is a little bit of, you know, you query agents, you go through submission processes. Though some of those things are similar, but not always. So it's weird. It's murky, and it's designed to be murky.
Yeah. You've said submission processes a couple of times, and you mentioned that you were in a 2-week submission.
Yes.
That just meant that you were submitting, like your agent was submitting everywhere for 2 weeks?
So when you are ready, your agent decides like the manuscript is ready to go on submission. They will usually draw up a list. So basically, they know your story as well as you do. They know you as an author. They also are probably thinking, where do we want this, your career to go, and where can best represent this book and get it to the most people? You know, who has worked with books like this before and who is looking for books like this? So they'll kind of come up with this master list, like a wish list of editors at certain imprints, at certain publishers. And for us, I think she started with 10. And the first 4 or 5 in that 2 weeks were rejections. And the next one that came in was the offer from HarperCollins at Harper Teen. And as far as I know, 2 weeks is considered on the quicker end for submission. There are people who are on submission for months, if not full years. And then there are people who sell in a matter of hours, but that's really rare. So
we have a lot of questions about world building.
Okay.
I want to start with Heather's question. Heather says, my high school students identify world building as an essential part of dystopian literature. They wonder how you approach the planning for it. Is it all done in the beginning with direct purpose, or does some of it evolve throughout the process of writing and force you to go back and revisit some earlier written parts?
I would say it's a little bit of both. And one of the things, if I could go back and sort of fix or, you know, help myself, I would say think about more things up front. But then also, who knows where I would have gotten in the process if I spent too much time world building. I love world building, and my challenge is stopping myself from world building too much and sort of burning all my energy and all my momentum on a part of the story that a lot of readers are never going to see. So much of that is just for you, the writer, to help you understand the world so you can tell the story in the most efficient way. And with dystopian specifically, I think because you're naturally building on something else, you're building on the foundation of a world that has collapsed, whether it be our world or something else. So you do have to know the parameters of the world you're building in. And I think a lot of great world building comes from asking questions. With Red Queen specifically, the first sort of inkling I had of that world and that story was I had the image in my head of a girl in an arena who is going to be executed, and then she electrocutes her executioner. So my immediate questions were, what was she going to be executed for? How does she have lightning powers? What kind of world exists where we have executions like this in arenas, and why are they trying to do this to her? And every question led to another question and kind of built another layer and another layer and another layer, and got me to a point where I felt like, okay, I know enough, and now I can move forward with the actual story that I really want to tell and not kind of lose all of it to the world building. I think you can overworld build, and there's also an element of discovery that you still want to have when you're writing. There's so many pieces of the world that come through out of necessity, or suddenly you think you have this idea of this character and where they come from, and then you're in the work and you're like, well, actually, I think this makes more sense, or they wouldn't do this thing unless they had this. And so there are definitely pieces that come while you are writing. I personally try to get as much as I can out beforehand, but you're actually never going to know how much you need until you're really in it. So it's just a balance.
With that, Fee is asking, do you ever get exhausted or overwhelmed when world building and writing books?
Absolutely, because you start spiraling of, you know, what do I name this character? Well, what culture are they from? What language does that culture speak? How do they do names? You know, what letters do they use? And what would their name be 100 years before? I will say, I love the creation of the maps. I did learn there is a too far back for maps, and that is tectonic plates. I started with the tectonic plates for Realmbreaker and started trying to work from that level and realized this is too far back. You do not need to know where the tectonic plates of your world are. Let's start working with, at the very least, coastlines and mountains. But yeah, you can absolutely overwhelm yourself, and it does come back to that moment of self-restraint where you realize, okay, what you're doing now and the level to which you are building is no longer helping you. It is hindering you from actually starting the story, and it can kind of become like a crutch or a procrastination.
Well, the maps, though, in your books are so gorgeous.
Oh my God. I made mine all in Photoshop, and then we gave it to an artist who was like, basically wove a magic wand around, and suddenly it just went into a piece of art.
Do you think your books can be read without the maps? Because I looked at the map so much.
Red Queen, yeah. Realmbreaker, I really pity anyone who tries to read that book without a map. My husband is reading the manuscript of Fatebreaker right now, and it's the manuscript. It doesn't have a map in it. Yeah. And so he's got it on Google on his phone, and he zooms in when he needs to. Because I don't have a big enough one. The ones I have are like this big, and so I'm like, it's not going to really help you because it's very complex. But yeah, I prefer books that require maps myself. So I think it's a bonus. And then there are people who get intimidated by maps. The first 2 Red Queen books did not have a map in the front of them. And I remember asking if we could, and they sort of said, oh, we find that maps make people put a book down. Or something like, well, maps make me pick a book up. So am I in the minority here?
Well, the artwork of a map in general is beautiful. So I don't know why it would sway people away. But
I know. I just love fictional maps or like fantasy maps. They're so great.
They are. So you had mentioned the opening, or kind of the original concept of Red Queen, her standing in an arena about to be executed. And Kevin asked, can you speak to the importance of referencing historic events to help ground fantasy? Yeah,
so that's a great point, just the idea of grounding fantasy. And I think as fantasy writers, that's always what we're trying to do. You know, we're telling you an extraordinary story, but how do we find like the ordinary in it so that you believe it? And one of the quickest ways to do that is to sort of echo touchstones that your readers will have, like historical events. You know, they can kind of see, oh, okay, it's like this, it happened like this. And that just helps them sort of understand and make those sort of leaps in logic and connection so that you can keep the story moving yourself and don't kind of get bogged down in too much exposition, because you know the audience is going to come with you on certain things. It's almost like tropes too. You know, tropes work because people recognize them and then anticipate certain things, and then you can manipulate that anticipation and that tension. So it's the same thing with using historical events or allusions to the real world. You're manipulating the audience into sort of leaning in and anticipating. And then you can give them what they're anticipating, which is going to be great, or you can give them something totally different, which is one of the things I love, is when I make you think something's going to happen and then something else happens instead.
I love that you love that, because it's great for reading.
Yeah. When I was writing the first Red Queen book and I had no idea that anyone would ever read it, I remember writing that big twist scene and thinking, oh, God, I really, really hope someone gets to read this, because that will be delightful.
Well, kind of speaking about grounding history or grounding fantasy through history and things like that, Candace's question is really pertinent at getting to kind of these structures that also views in real cultures, but also in fantasy cultures. So Candace is saying, I would love to hear more about your process for developing the different cultures and how that intersects with power, how the intersection with power is viewed by that culture. Yeah, that's a great point. And when I was building for Realmbreaker specifically, I knew I wanted to create a world sort of without
the same trappings of, at the very least, like race-based oppression that we see in our history and our current reality. I did not want that in my world. And I sort of thought, it's a fantasy world. I do not have to build it with that sort of skin-based or race-based levels of discrimination. It's just not going to be in my work. Absolutely, there's going to be discrimination or oppression or inequality based on other things, because like there's monarchies in it. So by definition, there is going to be levels of inequality. But when I came into it with that idea of, I want this to be a really expansive, cooperative world where people are different and celebrate their differences, but there's no negativity to having a difference. And that really opened up being able to just sort of go wild in terms of creating different cultures and creating a multicultural cast, and approaching it not from a standpoint of like checking boxes, but just, I want the world to feel as big and as real as possible. And our world is big and real and diverse. And so for me, when a fantasy world kind of looks all the same, that almost takes me out of it because I don't believe it. But when I have a world that has really immense trade networks and connections between all these different cultures and languages and geographic locations, it feels more real to me and more interesting. And I want to like get in the nitty gritty of, you know, what is the country exporting and who's married to who over here and what alliances exist. On the world building side, when looking at language, I cheat a lot in that I use the corner cut tactic of, instead of, you know, building a whole language like I'm a linguist or something, I kind of will make a little bit of a chart and I will choose which letters certain languages and cultures use. And I'll be like, okay, they use K, but they don't use C. So anywhere you would particularly have a C, it's going to be a K instead. And I'm building from that angle. And that allows me to create words and names that at the end of the day, once the reader has gotten through that first book, they're going to naturally start recognizing the patterns of language themselves. And like using historical events or tropes, you're letting the audience learn and allowing them to make simple jumps in logic of knowing, okay, this person's from here. And you don't have to over-explain to them. So all those levels of world building are meant to, you know, ground the reader and make them think the world is real, and also allow them to metabolize the story faster and get them where they need to go without bogging them down in all of that information.
How do you organize all of this information? Because there's so many levels of nuance there. How do you keep it all straight?
Scrivener. Scrivener is probably my favorite word processing doc, because it's a single window, but you have all of these different files on the side. And so I'll have my research file and each page will be different, but you're just clicking in between things in a single window as opposed to having 10 Word documents open.
Sam is saying, I'm sure it can vary a lot, but how long does writing a good book take? Well,
depends on who you talk to, because some people would say I've never written a good book.
Well, we know that is not the case.
Thank you. Bless you. For me personally, a first draft takes between 6 and 7 months.
Wow.
And I've been slowing down recently because writing the book is not the only part of the job. And that's something you only learn once you publish a book, is that publishing it is a job in itself, and marketing it and being present on social media, which for better or worse is becoming more and more of a requirement of us. So you are also writing the book, but you're also kind of trying to sell the book too. There's very few authors who can just write the book and disappear to go work on the next one. And that's kind of the ideal, but you have to, it takes a lot of privilege and a lot of luck and a lot of books under your belt and success under your belt to be able to do that. So it's 6 or 7 months to write that first draft, but then there's, you know, maybe a year of editing and marketing ramp up. And with YA specifically, they kind of want you on the book a year schedule. And I have fallen off that train, thank God. For the first few years of writing, especially when you're a debut and you kind of need to prove yourself and you need to have these books coming out, or you're an author who is making your money this way and you have to sort of stack books together, it can be really, really hard. And I don't know how authors put out more than one book a year, because I personally struggle with one a year. But I also write longer books, at least in the YA space. You know, the Realmbreaker books are between 150 and 180,000 words. And I have some friends who are like, wow, I write books that are 60,000 words long. And I'm like, and we get paid the same.
It's not
I'm an idiot.
So, Carly wants to know, do you build your world first or your characters first? Because I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, is your world kind of always brewing there in the background when you're working on something else? And then do you start writing and maybe creating the characters after you've conceptualized the world? How does that work?
For Red Queen, it was character as well as like the concept of the world, not necessarily like a map or anything like that, but concept of the world and character were the things that came first. You know, the girl in the arena, Mare, and a world where people have superhuman abilities. And there is this terrible distinction between those who have them and those who don't. For Realmbreaker, I went in knowing conceptually I wanted to write the Lord of the Rings story that I wanted when I was a teenager, reading fan fiction and trying to find myself in sort of like Middle Earth, while also feeling like you're a girl, you can't be part of the Fellowship of the Ring. And I always wanted to be. And so going into Realmbreaker, I knew I wanted this kind of epic fantasy story with this kind of adventure. And I wanted a teen girl character who I would have felt like at 14, who I would have been able to see myself in or relate to, while also thinking I get to build this fantasy world. And I know I want it to be inspired by Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, very much the Mediterranean sphere, because the thing I always wanted from my fantasy novels was bigger maps, and I want to see the edge of the world, and I want to see more and more and more. So I was just happy to be able to get to create that and kind of push at the boundaries of like my version of Middle Earth, while also hopefully creating a little bit of a more realistic, diverse Middle Earth at the same time, with a world that had like a working economy and that felt very lived in. That was always sort of my one of my critiques of Lord of the Rings, as much as I loved it, as I was like, I don't really understand how the economy works here, and like where are things being grown, where are things being mined, what trade networks do we actually have, like why do the hobbits have glass and a post office, but the King of Rohan lives in a barn? I don't get that. So I wanted a world that kind of scratched that itch for me.
And it's also it probably scratched that itch for a lot of readers too. To see yourself reflected in things like that. And even though you're taking people to a new world, you know, outside of our current reality, to still see yourself in that new world is part of the dream.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I very much understand like Realmbreaker is a bit of a jump from Red Queen. So there are a lot of readers who love Red Queen and move on to Realmbreaker and are like, oh, this isn't for me. And that's totally cool. But the readers who it is for, the readers who are like, I got it. I understand what you're doing. It feels like finding a long lost sibling or someone who speaks your language when you have never met someone who speaks your language. Yeah. It feels very much like I'm being seen and they're being seen at the same time.
Lily just asked, did you know that Red Queen was going to be a series, or was it a gradual realization? And I think to add to that, just even Realmbreaker in general, you create these amazing worlds, these big worlds. We can't just see them once. So right. Did you know that they were going to be series?
Well, I'm a greedy person and I love big series. So for Red Queen, I sold it as a 3-book series.
Okay.
And always, as I was writing the first one, knowing where it ended, I knew the story does not actually end with this first book. It will continue. And so we sold it as 3. And when I was in the middle of book 2, I realized I was going to need a 4th book to finish it. I just did 3 instead of 4. I was going to need a 4th book to finish it. And thankfully my publisher was very on board with that. And then we also did a short story collection at the end that was sort of like, where are they now? And that was really fun because I got to mix that with more world building information and a lot of things that I invented over the course of the series. And then for Realmbreaker, having had the experience of planning for 3 and having to expend a 4 and like a little bit more, I thought, no, you are going to write 3 and that is going to be it. make sure you don't do that again.
So do you close it all up then in Fatebreaker?
Yes, Fatebreaker is the definitive end to this storytelling arc. And also with Red Queen, finishing the series and then doing the short stories, I very much feel like I've addressed everything at this point that I want to do. Like there's no story compelling me. There's no voice saying, come back and give me my page time or my screen time or whatever. Yeah. With Realmbreaker, so I now have, plenty of characters who get their arc or sort of finish their story. And then there are a couple who are still like, hey, there's more here. This would be fun. And so we'll see how that goes.
Uh-huh. Well, so we do have quite a few character questions, and that statement kind of brings me to some of those. Rebecca is saying, my tween daughter will be attending this talk. So hello. And is curious how you create your characters. By that, she means how you flesh out their individual personality traits, develop their various quirks, etc.
So some people I know will have like sheets, and they will know that character from head to toe starting the work. I have to get to know the character as I'm writing. I definitely know where they've come from and sort of big things that have informed their personality. I absolutely know like the archetype of a character for sure. It's almost like I'm sculpting a statue. And when the book starts, I know the shape, and then things start to get more precise as the story goes on. And of course, you finish a draft and you go back and you're like, that part doesn't make sense with that part now, and who I know this character to now be. So you are going to go back and sort of hone things. But I do start knowing like architecturally what form they're going to take in the story, what pillar they are holding up, what sort of their stereotype is, and where they come from. Those are the things that are really key to me starting a story. I definitely feel like my characters are rats and the story is a maze. I put them at the beginning of the maze and I watch them run it. And sometimes they go off the path, and that's always really fun.
So Skylar says, how do you decide the little things then? Like what food your characters eat, or what slang they use, like ma, mother, mom, mama, I guess, as an example. Because they, especially in the Realmbreaker series, there are so many different points of view.
Yeah. So food and slang specifically, especially slang and like curse words, those are world building elements. And okay. I find those are easier because I know where the character comes from. So what their background is, what kind of education do they have? What kind of religion do they follow? Those things will really inform slang and curse words. And slang and curse words do so much heavy lifting in terms of building a world. Like, what does somebody swear on? What God do they swear by when they're frustrated or angry or hurt? Like that is really, really cool to me. And I love those little pieces. Food, I'm getting better at food. But there are definitely some details where I'm sort of like, okay, let's just keep going. And that comes from screenwriting. I remember the first draft of Red Queen, my editor was like, hey, this main character, what color is his eyes? Because you don't say. And I'm like, because in screenwriting, one of the things that is different is you're not really describing physical characteristics unless it's important to the story. Because when you're casting, if the script says this character has electric blue eyes for no reason, you don't want to be exclusionary to actors like auditioning. You're more capturing their personality and their characteristics in their descriptions versus physically what they look like, because you want someone to be able to project a certain actor, whatever actor they're thinking of, into a script. Pro side, it does mean that I'm actively working against my instincts, and I'm constantly saying, like, you need to describe this character more. You need to describe what they look like more and paint a picture more for the audience, because I was taught not to do that. And I'm getting better at it. But with that first Red Queen book specifically, I was not specific about a lot of people because I didn't want to overly influence the reader. And I think it's always best when a reader can project who they want into a story. But with prose writing and novels, you do want to be able to direct them in a little bit.
Makes sense.
Hmm.
So what about characters' names then? Samantha's saying, how do you choose your characters' names?
Names are also world building. Names are so much fun. For Red Queen specifically, because I was naming, you know, reds and silvers, and the silvers were the elite. And I knew that their society, in my mind, was very much inspired by at least the flavor of Imperial Rome. So a lot of those names are Latin based or Latin adjacent. They have a really imperial connotation to them. You know, you see that name on a page, and before you know anything else about them, I wanted a reader to identify, oh, they got a fancy name, they got to be a silver. Whereas the reds had more sort of common brutish names, or just like less intense. So I had a name bank. So whenever I was writing and I'm like, oh, I need a name for this character, and I didn't want to spend, you know, 30 minutes looking up names, I would go to my name bank and I would pull a name. But for the main characters, I spent a lot more time thinking about them. Maven and Mare did jump out to me. They just like came to me fully formed. Mare Barrow just happened in my head, and I don't know where it came from, but it fit the connotation I was trying to find for her and her sort of background. And then Maven also kind of came to me. His last name, of course, was Calor, which means fire or heat in Latin. So I was like, oh, so fancy. So smart of me. And then Cal was probably the most constructed name, because I knew I wanted him to have kind of a goofy, fancy, real first name that nobody calls him by, like a real life royal, with a cool nickname. And so it was Tiberius is his real name, but everybody calls him Cal. And I loved that distinction. But I'm definitely always thinking about names in terms of what level of world building can they do for me. And then in Realmbreaker, similarly, I'm thinking about what languages these characters are coming from, and what their names relate to. While also, I think especially when you're writing fantasy, you have to try and balance not overwhelming your audience with a name that is too far out there. Mm-hmm. I'm definitely someone who, if I see like multiple apostrophes in a name, my eyes are going to cross.
I like to listen to the audiobook as well as read in print. And one of the reasons I do that is because I, especially in fantasy, will mispronounce names in my head, and then I'll hear the audio version and be like,
I actually just got an email for that of, okay, we need you to write out the pronunciations for Fatebreaker.
So that somebody can read them out loud.
Yep.
So Ashley is saying, how do you approach character arcs in a series? Do you have one major arc for the full series and small ones in each book?
Yeah, I think so. And it's the same with story arc. You know, I think every book needs to feel like it has its own journey underneath the umbrella of the large journey. One of the best ways you can look at that is if you look at the original Star Wars trilogy. You know, every movie is its own story, but they're all part of a bigger story. And if you're also studying act structure, Star Wars breaks down into pure act structure. The end of Empire Strikes Back is the end of Act 2. It is the lowest point. It is like beautiful. If you look at the skeleton of those movies, you will know how to write a story in 3-act 8 sequence structure. And character-wise, you know where they're going, at least for me, because I have to go on the journey with them to like adequately see how they grow. Because sometimes you can say like, okay, and then the character, this is going to happen to them, so now they think this way. And sometimes it doesn't work like that. Sometimes they do kind of have a mind of their own and they develop in a way you didn't expect. Mm-hmm. But I sort of know physically where they're going to end up for the most part. You know, like, are they going to be alive at the end of this book? I know that.
Okay, I was going to say, so do you already know like the end for that character when it's, especially in a series?
Yes. So for Red Queen, I knew the ending of that series very early, I think during book 1, but also while I was drafting the first draft of book 1, I kind of didn't think it was ever going to go anywhere. So it was like, I think that's where it would go if anyone ever paid me for this book. I wasn't thinking too strongly about it. That book was kind of written in a vacuum. But then with Realmbreaker, it was more, I know who I want to win. I know where I want the world to be at the end of this series. And now I've got to move my people into place and see which endings for them fit along the way.
Okay. Well, Nina is saying, with all of that, how do you balance character development and plot development without sacrificing pacing?
That is a really good question and really hard. And I think sometimes, you know, I don't do it well. I am a slave to, more than anything, I think it's pacing that I am always going to prioritize, because I think that's really important. Like, an audience will forgive you if you're still pulling them through the story. You can kind of like, okay, the character development in this part isn't great, but we're always, you know, trying to keep you in the story. And then I've always been told I am not a character writer. I am a plot writer, and that is just who I am. And the characters not fall to the wayside, but are always very secondary to the plot. I know my plot first, and then I let my characters, you know, run that rat maze. I've built this plot. Now, how are you going to navigate through it? So they go hand in hand, but I think plot comes first versus character development. Like, I know the seed they're starting as, and then they got to grow, and I'm going to watch them grow.
Okay. So then do you follow a strict protocol for plot development and scenes, especially scenes of goal and conflict and disaster? Christina's asking, how do you decide if each chapter is worthy of inclusion?
I write chronologically. So I think that does a lot of heavy lifting for me for knowing what needs to be in the work. Because I'm just like building blocks on top of each other. If I'm writing out of order, I think I absolutely would end up writing like, oh, this chapter actually doesn't fit. And I'm too lazy to write things that aren't going to be included in the story. I'm not writing more than I need to. But I think writing chronologically helps me there because I know what needs to happen next. I can feel it. There are definitely moments where I can feel that I have gone off the path a little, and maybe I need to cut the last 1,000 words and move back to where I knew where the story was going, or I knew how to get to point B. A lot of my storytelling, I know my beginning, I know my act 1, and I know my act 3. I usually know where act 2 ends. I usually know where my lowest point is and where all hope is lost. And it's act 2, the middle, where I am sort of finding my way through the forest. Like, I have a map and I'm in the dark, but I have a flashlight. I just talk about writing in all of these super convoluted metaphors. So thank you guys for following along on that.
I think they make total sense.
Okay, good. But yeah, writing chronologically and knowing my first act and my third act, those are always really important to me. I'm not a discovery writer who can pants a whole book. I can't do that.
Well, it's a good thing that Fatebreaker comes out soon then, in just a couple months, so that we can get to act 3 when you left us all devastated.
Oh, me.
So I have to ask Victoria's question now because it made me laugh out loud. So Victoria says, what is the most thoroughly bonkers plotline or scene you have ever written? Second part of the question is your amazing skin a result of bathing in the tears of your readers?
Thank you. Victoria, did I plant that? Did I plant that question? No, my skin is a result of being super greasy all the time. I was a really greasy teenager who had terrible skin all through college and high school and middle school. And I remember when I got zits in middle school, I got them pretty early. I was like, this is good. I'll get them out of the way and I'll have great skin in high school. Didn't work like that. It did not work like that. But no, I spend a lot of money on skincare. What was the other part of the question?
Yeah, like, wait, let's talk about my skin some more.
Yeah, let's talk about me.
So the first part of the question was, what is the most thoroughly bonkers plot line or scene you have ever written?
Bonkers scene. Ooh, Victoria, I wish I had this before so I could like think. It's one of those things like when you get asked, oh, what books have you read in the last year? And you're kind of like, I don't know.
Well, I'm going to ask that
or what happened
too,
on this TV show last week? I don't know. I feel like I'm constantly shoveling things out of my brain to let new things in. Bonker scene. I write some messed up things. I can't talk about it in Fatebreaker, but there was a potential story choice that I made that I then walked back on because I personally was like, I am not comfortable writing this. And I can't talk about it yet, but there was that. It was like a character making a certain kind of sacrifice to gain some power. And it was a good story choice. On like another author, I think, would have really made that work, but I couldn't.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry. That's a terrible answer, but Fatebreaker is like the most recent in my mind book. And that was probably one of the more messed up parts.
Well, we're all on the edges of our seats waiting for the book to come out then. So Jeannie is asking, what is the secret to writing a good fight scene or epic battle? And from which point of view do you prefer? But I think I've heard before that you have a really cool way of getting into fight scenes with your music playlists.
I do have playlists, and I will usually choreograph a fight scene to music before I write it. Like I will walk around with my dog and I will play a song over and over and over again and basically see the whole scene in my mind as if I was watching a film, like down to the certain movements and the beats and like making the rhythm work with the song, the certain cuts, like a zoom, anything. I'm seeing it as a film in my head. And once I have that, then I feel like I can write it. And I'm just trying to create that same visual as much as I can, as closely as I possibly can for someone else. I'm trying to project exactly what I'm seeing onto the page so a reader can read it and understand exactly what I see. And obviously that translation is never going to be 100%, but having the rhythm and sort of the organic nature of having it set to music really helps me, especially because there's parts of the thing of choreographing a fight scene where you're not going to know what happens next. And the music is almost like this happens next. And you're like, oh, what goes with this? Oh, of course. And you keep it going. I take a lot of pride in my action set pieces. I think that's probably where I'm best at writing. And I think it's screenwriting training because that is so momentum driven and so movement driven. So you're always trying to do exactly what I just said, which is make a reader see exactly what you see. So that's what I fall back on is screenplay when I am writing a fight scene, and also not overwhelming the reader with too much information. That is also very important and a real balance, because sometimes you're given information you do not need in the moment of that fight scene. You want your heartbeat to match the heartbeat of the character. You want to feel like the swing of the sword, the step, the catch of the breath. You want them to smell what's going on. Obviously, you use all your sensory details, but you don't want to give them too much. You want to just ground them in that exact moment and have them feel that heartbeat.
Lily's asking, can you link the playlists?
My Spotify is public. And I was actually just thinking about this because I saw another author basically post like a Word document, essentially walking people through like, this song was written to this scene, this song was written to this scene. And I have a ton of them where I can actually be like, okay, at 37 seconds into this song, this person draws this blade and this person swings this punch. And I could do that. And I think I should.
Yeah, you should do that.
You might see a TikTok of me playing a song and being like, okay, here we are in the scene. This is a stampede and a horse chase and it's going to here, blah, 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 blah. But I don't know if I could do it without being really embarrassing.
It's fine. We would all appreciate it. I'm just picturing you now, like, I know you said that you do it all in your head, but when you were first like, I turn on the music and I choreograph everything, and I'm like picturing you like pretending to have a
that
knife.
Does happen, and I do have a fake sword in my office, and I will occasionally be like, okay, which hand is what? How are we? It's like someone's being like, I did this with Bladebreaker when Corayne is being like held up by the neck and someone's got a sword to her neck. I'm like, how would she move? And so I was like in my office.
shoving yourself against the wall.
If anyone had a camera on me when I'm writing, I'm either completely zombie faced, and I usually look to the right and I'm not looking at the screen as I'm typing. I'm seeing the words and like the thing in my head. So I look like I am fully out of it, or I'm like moving, doing all these things. I know some authors will have mirrors, and so they can describe facial expressions. But the thought of a mirror in front of me while I write.
While you're writing, yeah.
My full nightmare.
Full nightmare.
Full nightmare.
That's what you're gonna dream about.
I don't need to see that. You don't need to see that.
Another Victoria question.
Ooh.
What fantasy world would you most love to visit and why?
People will ask that and they're like, oh, who would you be in this story? And, you know, immediately you want to say, oh, I'd be a wonderful elf or a warrior or something. I would not. I know me. I would be a villager who's just hearing about the war 2 months after it ended. There are so many fantasy worlds that are incredible to read about, but so many of them I would never want to set foot in.
True.
I think the Shire would be wonderful. That I would be a very, very happy hobbit. I'm already almost the height. We won't talk about my feet. But they seem like they've got it right. They're just, you know, living this beautiful pastoral lifestyle with their strawberries and cream in the fields. And occasionally they're like, oh, the world almost ended. Oh, how about that? But yeah, I think the Shire post scouring, when things have healed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So Brianna is asking, now that the strikes are over, is there any talk about continuing or any updates on the adaptation of Red Queen into a show? Mm-hmm.
Well, I was fully prepared in my mind because strikes kill projects all the time. It happens left and right. And I was fully prepared coming out of the strike because we couldn't talk to our team at all. I'm a WGA author or writer, so I couldn't talk to anybody. I was fully prepared to be told, like, we tried, thanks. The strike has really killed everything, and we're just going to keep moving on. And I was ready to be happy with that, made my peace with it a long time ago. Instead, it was, strike's over. Let's all go get dinner. Let's chat. We've got a story synopsis coming. What are your notes? And it was right back to getting a pilot script together. We're still early on in the process. No casting choices have been made. We have a fantastic showrunner, and I'm still very much involved with the project as much as I want to be. And everyone's still very excited about it. I know it's been 10 years now since the original rights sold, or not sold, but were optioned. So it's a long process, if that makes anybody feel better. You know, Red Queen came out in 2015 and the option was sold in 2013, and we're still here, still trying to make it work. Mm-hmm. The best thing people can do, though, if they are, you know, hungry for adaptations of their favorite books, the best thing you can do is get other people to read them, because entertainment is a business and people don't put out movies or television if they don't think there's going to be an audience. So the more people you can get to be fans of books, the more of an audience you're proving a book has, and therefore you're making it more likely that there will be an adaptation.
Mm-hmm. Well, all of us here today are doing our part.
Thank you.
Somebody said, ask her to post the Spotify link to her IG stories after the live event.
Sure, I will do that. Unless I immediately forget.
We could also put it in the resources after the talk.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's just Victoria Aveyard on Spotify.
Okay.
And some of my playlists, I think, are, I mean, to me, they're pretty spoilery.
To you, yeah, but you choreographed.
Yeah, I obviously know, like, oh yes, this Hosier song means this.
No. Okay, so the other dreaded question that you hate: who's your favorite author, and or what book are you reading right now that everybody needs to run and check out?
Right now, I'm reading Fairy Tale by Stephen King, because I feel like everyone around me read it and loved it, and I'm a dog person, and so much of this book revolves around a very elderly dog, and it is not a horror Stephen King novel. It is not a scary book. I am terrified for this dog. I am like, someone just needs to tell me if the dog lives or dies because
Aww.
I can't handle it. And every time every time there is a sentence about how the dog's having a hard time going up the stairs, I have to just sit there and like hold my dog and be like, never leave me. So that's what I'm reading right now. But I think my favorite book, my favorite fantasy novel of the last 5 or 6 years, and if I could erase my brain and reread this series again, I would, is The Bear and the Nightingale series by Catherine Arden. It's called the Winter Night series, but the first book is called The Bear and the Nightingale. So good. Russian fantasy, incredible world building, fantastic characters, enemies to lovers, and the escalation of that series is just beautiful. And I feel the same way about the Queen's Thief series by Megan Whalen Turner, which I just finished this past spring. I tore through I think there's 5 of them. So good.
I agree with that. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's truly been a pleasure. I've had a lot of fun talking to you for the last hour. So thank you very much.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This is so cool. And like I said, I was a library kid even before my parents were abandoning me there. We would go once a week and my mom would let me rent a puppet from the library.
Rent a puppet?
Yeah. My local library would let you take home, rent, like check out a puppet. And every week, that was how my mom got me a new toy, is I got a used puppet that I would then return a week later.
Great idea. I have a 3-year-old who's always asking for things.
Like a health thing now. I don't know if they would do it. But yeah, I was hand up in a puppet. Yeah. So anyway, I really appreciate this. I think this is so cool that you guys get to do this. And it was really lovely chatting with you.
Likewise. I also want to extend a huge thank you to the viewers, because of course, without the viewers, none of this would be possible. So we thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. Below the live stream video, in the Rate This Program tab, you can find a resources area, which contains links to all of Victoria's books, including a pre-order link to Fatebreaker. We look forward to seeing you all again next week when we chat with New York Times bestselling author Stephanie Land about her new memoir, Class. I am Brandon Adler. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day.